Thanks for joining us at Into the Weeds, and we have to give you an apology today because we had planned on doing a follow-up to our immigration conversation. Here's what happened. I'll give you the short version, and then we're going to talk about something entirely different. So Phil and I basically had a disagreement on whether or not illegal immigrants were a net benefit or a net cost as far as resources are concerned. And so we both went out as intrepid adventurers into the 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 internet and to try to find some information to support our positions. And what we found was a tremendous wealth of information, so much so that I think we've both kind of agreed that it's almost impossible to get to any kind of a meaningful consensus on this particular question at this moment. So right now, as it sits, Phil and I have a disagreement. I believe that people who come into this country illegally are a net economic cost based on the amount of revenue that they generate, the amount of services that they absorb, and the amount of market distortion that they create, meaning bringing wages down and bringing housing prices up and other commodity prices up. Uh, However, what you find when you go out there is that all conservative sources agree with that, and all progressive sources disagree with that. And so, how can you have a consensus when there's no source of information that both Phil and I can agree is worth listening to? That's kind of where I'm at. I'm going to kick it to Phil, let him give you his take on the immigration thing before we move on to our next issue. Go ahead, sir.
Right, and I want to just clarify, and on Jubal's behalf and mine, we can just go to the internet. Like we said, we were looking at what economists say. We were looking at what think tanks said. We were looking at like thoughtful analysis. So we weren't going on to
Yeah, we
MSNBC
weren't
and
we weren't going on
Fox.
Reddit. Yeah,
Right,
we
exactly. We didn't go on to Reddit. We didn't go on TikTok. Right.
right,
We
right.
were trying to see what analysts said, and just like Jubal said, it turned out to be a really complicated question. And I'll just lay out some of the complications. In the some studies that I saw, there was people continue to make a distinction between the fiscal impact at the federal level versus what happens at the state and the local level. So you need to disaggregate that. There were some people who challenged the idea of just looking at what do they pay and what do they cost. There were indirect fiscal costs that they said that you needed to look at. So in other words, um, if I was looking at the construction industry because that was my previous career, that they were talking about how the influx of undocumented immigrants, what that frequently does is one, it lowers labor costs, right? So that increases profit, but it also creates opportunities for people who have fluency in English to move up. So they're no longer doing labor. How do you calculate that into the equation? If you have two educated husband and wife, but one of them stays home and works, takes care of the kids, if there's an undocumented person who can now take care of the kids and now they can go back to work and now they're making more money and so they're being taxed more and that's being kicked into the revenue side. How do you calculate that? It was like the degrees of complexity um, just seemed to grow. I will say, while I think generally speaking, Jubal has it right, that what was also interesting was that there was an agreement among some progressive and libertarian organizations that the way to solve the problem of the fiscal input was to increase work authorizations. In other words,
Mm.
get these people on the into the system, and then they're definitely paying more. All that was another facet of the story. So it just got them. I think the more we looked into it, the more complex it became. Aside from the people who are just sort of wedded to their positions, it just seemed like it was a complicated thing. What Jubal and I do is frequently try and find areas of common ground. So where we might ultimately go in the future is sort of addressing some of the bigger questions. But for now, we decided that it was best to just hold off on this and
Right.
and just move on.
we did as Phil says though, we did reach one point of common ground, which is that I think he and I both agree that anybody who comes to the border who wants to work, who wants to come in and wants to be productive, wants to work, we should be able to get a work permit into their hands very quickly, like right away. Ideally, I can imagine a system where somebody comes to the border, puts their thumb on a scanner. We know who they are. We know where they're going. We can get them their work visa that day. Maybe that's, pie in the sky, but as close as we can get to that, right? I think Phil and I both agree that anybody who wants to work, we got two words for you: welcome aboard, right?
Right, and
Uh,
and 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 that's as long as the economy can absorb the additional workers. Like, we don't want
mm,
to flood the market with people. So um, there does have to be regulation at the border. It can't just
mm,
be that anybody who wants to come in. If everybody who wants to come in knows they're going to get a work authorization, that could create a flood of people. And so everything has to be sort of moderated and taken into account. But on that general
right.
idea, we agree.
So we reserve the right to reopen this can of worms at a later date. We may talk about immigration again, and we probably should. I mean, there's going to be a lot that happens around immigration in the future, so expect us to return to this issue. But today, we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about tariffs. This isn't going to be an incredibly long episode because we just burned a few minutes talking about our closing up the immigration stuff. But I think an overarching picture of the reality of the tariff situation that we're in right now is worth looking at. Since I introduced the immigration side of things, I'm going to give it to my good friend Phil. He's going to introduce the tariff conversation, and then we're going to get into the weeds.
Right. And so right now it's supposed to be the current events sort of part of this discussion. And today there was actually additional news on the tariffs front. Jubal, I'm not sure if you're aware of this because you and I haven't spoken, but earlier this morning, um, President Trump tweeted, essentially said that negotiations aren't going anywhere with the EU. And I think he set a date of June 2nd, for some
Mhm.
reason, I think is a date where all goods coming in from the EU would get a 50% tariff on them. So that was something he said. And then earlier, I think in the morning, after Apple announced that they were going to be shifting production over to India for the iPhone, Donald Trump said that he was going to impose, I think it was a 25% tariff on iPhones, and then later on he extended it to Samsung as well. So the idea is that um, the whole point of the tariffs, according to Trump, is to encourage, or actually, I would say coerce manufacturers to reshore their manufacturing. And so that has caused the market to take a tumble again today. Last I looked, it was like 300 points. And so it just, again, is creating uncertainty. It looks to me like the market more and more is just viewing these kind of statements as a negotiating tactic on Trump's part, just essentially saying, like, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to raise tariffs. I don't particularly think it's a good negotiating tactic. I think it's a bad negotiating tactic. He put on the tariffs, he took them off. Now he put on it again. 90-day pause is now less than a 90-day pause. I think and Jubal and I may disagree on this. I don't know. But I think everybody understands that if you increase tariffs on countries, on goods coming into the United States, ultimately, both the importers and the consumers will bear the brunt of that. So I think they understand that the predicament Donald Trump is in is that um, the way our system works is that when inflation goes up, people blame the president, whether or not it's the president's fault. People blame the president, and so I think these our allies know and our trading partners know that Donald Trump can't afford to, especially as the next elections are going to be coming up in not too distant future. He can't afford a trade war. It would be very difficult um, for him. Already in terms of polls, he's underwater on inflation, underwater on the economy, And so I don't think he's credible. And if you're not credible, then you're not going to be treated that way in terms of negotiations. And so ultimately, I think the way that the tariffs were established, the silly formula that the U.S. Trade Representative put on the government webpage explaining how they arrived at this, it just shows to me, and I'm sure people disagrees, a degree of incompetence that is mind-boggling to me. Trade tariffs can serve a valuable function, and there is a place for them, but they have to be used like a scalpel, not like a sledgehammer. And what Trump announced on April 2nd was the sledgehammer approach. So that's my general take on tariffs.
Okay. Well, yeah, I do disagree. Big surprise, right? I
Mhm.
but here's the thing. I mean, I'm sure there are places where you and I agree, but I do think that overall the purpose of the tariff structure that Donald Trump has put in place is that he wanted to open negotiations essentially with as many different countries as he possibly could. To get the ball rolling, he instituted these tariffs. If you go back and you listen to what he said prior to the election, he basically ran on fair trade, right? He said that the United States for a long time has been taken advantage of in international trade situations. And that is correct as far as the orthodoxy of presidential administrations prior to Donald Trump have basically been one of engagement. And this goes back to Bill Clinton, right? It's the idea that Bill Clinton surmised correctly that we've never been to war with a country that has a McDonald's in it, right? So maybe the goal should be to get more McDonald's into more countries, right? So let's trade. And this was the idea in Washington from the Clinton administration and through the Bush administration. It became kind of a neocon artifact, which is that we just need to trade with other countries, even if the terms of that trade are not necessarily super beneficial for us. The fact that we are trading with these other countries is ultimately going to be to the good. There's an element of truth to that, but as I think as world relationships began to stabilize, and certainly as trade deals with our allies began to manifest in ways that were not super advantageous to the United States, there were imbalances that took place. Now, here's the thing, just so people understand, when you there's a difference between an increase in price, the increase in price of goods, and the increase in value of goods, and there's a difference between the increase in price of goods and inflation, right? Tariffs do not create inflation. Inflation is when your currency, the currency of your nation, is worth less. Tariffs don't have anything to do with the value of a nation's currency. So the idea that adding a tariff is like inflation is not correct, right?
I think I don't know any economist who would agree with you. You know,
I
it's
don't.
interesting. If you go on to the U.S. Trade
So you're
Representative,
saying tariffs are inflation?
yes, if yeah, because anything that increased costs, if the cost of labor goes up,
Hmm.
let's say the cost of labor goes up 10%, right? Is that going to create inflation?
If well, it's so it's. I don't know
I
how to
mean, I'm,
answer
I'm
that
just it's
question.
it's a,
It's
it's a
like,
it's a really simple question. If I was an employer, you were an employer. If
sure.
you had to increase your uh, if you had to increase your workers' wages by 10%, and you're working on a tight margin, right? Tight profit margin. If
Sure.
you have to give them a 10% raise, all
Hmm.
of your employees, is that going to lead to inflation? And if it doesn't lead to inflation, what is it going to lead
So
to?
you're saying then that inflation and price increases are the same?
I'm saying that as people understand it, when prices go up, that's what we call inflation.
No, that's
When
not correct.
prices go up, well, that is right. And that's how people live. Okay. And if you go to the US Trade Representative webpage, when they
Hmm.
did their ridiculous calculation that he used to come up with his trade barriers, one of the things they talk about is um, that the average, and I don't think it's accurate, but this is what I'm quoting them. Weighted by imports, the average tariffs across deficit countries is 45%, and the average across the entire globe is 41%, the average tariff. And if you recall in their calculation, this bizarre calculation they did, they calculated the pass through of those costs to be at 0.25%. So
Right.
by their own calculation, and whether 0.25 is a good number is open for debate. I mean, I think the idea of it being universal is kind of ridiculous. That would lead to a 10%, 10.25% increase in prices. That's inflation.
Okay,
And
so
so, yes,
if we're gonna say, let me just throw this out there. That's
okay,
fine. I'll stipulate to this. I'll say inflation can be seen as any increase in prices,
correct.
right? If that's the definition that we're going to use, fine, we could do that. So what that means is we have to start looking at all different kinds of things then that lead to price increases, right?
Mhm, right,
Some things that lead to price increases, boy, this we're really going to get in the weeds now, aren't we? Some things that lead to price increases can happen at the economic planning level, but some things are organic, right? Like changes in the market can have effects on what prices are, of course, right? We know
sure,
that, we understand that. So if we were to institute tariffs, let's say, against a particular country that manufactures a particular good, widgets, right? We're importing widgets from Widgetistan, and we put a 100% tariff on widgets coming in from Widgetistan. What that does is it creates an incentive to produce as you said, to start manufacturing widgets in the United States, right?
right,
And ultimately, that's the goal. Is that we want to have things manufactured here instead of manufactured elsewhere and imported, right? Because that means that the production process is handled by American workers and happens under American laws. That's sort of the philosophy, I think, of the Trump administration is let's make stuff here, right?
right.
And so tariffs are a way of doing that because that creates an incentive. That 100% tariff on widgets coming in from another country creates an incentive to produce tariffs to produce widgets here, even if those widgets end up being a little bit more expensive than they were when they were imported, right? But the
Right. And
but
it's,
the quality will be higher.
well, it may or may not be higher. We
Almost
don't know.
certainly. Almost
No, we
certainly.
don't know that. I mean, we get stuff from you. Jubal and I had this conversation before that wasn't recorded. We get all kinds of stuff from China that
Sure.
is very sophisticated stuff. iPhones are not. I remember one time my ex bought a little wooden wheelbarrow. It was like it was an ornamental thing that she put like flowers in or something. And I thought, how is it possible that it's cost efficient to make this wheelbarrow, this tiny little wooden wheelbarrow in China, ship it over to the US and still make a profit? But that's the way it is. But those are the kind of goods you're talking about. But the kinds of things that we import from China can be very
I think
sophisticated things. But all that leaves everything aside. The reality is that if things get onshore, and if it winds up being that the widget that costs $10 now costs everybody $20, you can tell people anything you want that this isn't inflation. All they know is they have less spending power, period. That's what they know. Now, I've said this before. I've probably said it to Jubal. I don't know if I've said it in this forum. If the Republicans should have learned anything from the last election, it's that you don't tell people that financially they're doing okay when they don't feel like they're doing okay.
okay, I agree. However, I don't think that that's what this administration is saying. I don't think this administration is trying to convince people. And in fact, I think what this administration has said is the opposite. They've said, "Look, we want to move manufacturing here, but that's gonna hurt in the beginning. There's going to be a bump that we have to
Yep.
get over." I think they have said that. They've been very clear about that, right? That to make this happen, to move manufacturing back to the States, is going to require some lifting of everybody who is part of the economy right now. And
So wait. So
what
when we what was the terminology? It's going to take some what?
some work, some lifting, some pain, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. And what by pain? Like I want you to operationalize pain. What does that mean? Pain.
That means it's going to cost us more.
Okay. But you're not calling that inflation.
Well, so if again, as I say, if what you want to call inflation is just any increase in prices,
Correct.
that's fine. We could use that terminology. So then, yes, it would be inflationary to put tariffs. My view of inflation is that it's linked to the value of currency. Maybe that's too esoteric. So
I think that's even too into the weeds for into the weeds.
okay, maybe
Here's
so.
the thing that I find troubling about that argument is that when Democrats argue for an increase in the minimum wage,
Hmm.
the conservative argument against increasing the minimum wage is what? That it's going to lead to inflation. But now, because inflation is being
Uh,
cost, well, here, let's do it this way. Let's maybe it's a better way to do it, and it'll be more useful in terms of our conversation. Do you think that inflation, as it's reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the next month, is going to go up or stay the same or go
I
down?
I would say I think that prices over the next 6 months are almost certainly going to go up somewhat.
Right?
I don't think there's a broad disagreement on that.
Okay.
And again, I think that this is something that the administration has been honest about. Is basically the administration is saying, look, for generations, we have been exporting our manufacturing. We have hollowed out the Rust Belt, right? We have sent jobs overseas for the last 40 years. And what Trump is saying is that has not paid off like we were told it would. And so what we're going to do is we're going to reverse that policy and we're going to start making things here again. Now, for that to happen, you have to create strong incentives to bring manufacturing back to the country.
See,
And
but you can do it in a variety of ways. You can
and
do that in a variety of ways.
and
The
he's
Chips Act.
he's I think he's using a variety
Well,
of
wait,
things.
the Chips Act was exactly that. The Chips Act was designed to go ahead and incentivize production in the United States, give
Mhm.
people tax benefits. That's like a
How
conservative
much
way that you
how
do it.
much has the CHIPS Act led to an increase
I
in
mean,
domestic
I don't know. I
manufacturing?
haven't seen a calculation, but I know that these kind of things take a long time. And for
Here's
somebody
here's what I would
to
recommend. Here's what I would
here,
recommend.
well, wait, and
Anybody who thinks the CHIPS Act was a good idea, you can go online. You can look it up for yourself. All you have to do is figure out how much manufacturing investment has come into the United States as a result of the CHIPS Act. You can find it, it's out there, and how much did it cost us? And then you can determine for yourself whether or not that was a
and
good
I
idea.
would think that at this point in time, because it takes so long to shift production, that I would not anticipate that within a short amount of time you would see a big shift. It takes businesses a long time and it's costly to move. You need you need economic certainty in order to make these kind of long-term decisions. But
Mhm.
what Joe Biden did was he went to Congress and he said to Congress, "This is what I want to do." The CHIPS Act was bipartisan. It had bipartisan support. He went through Congress, negotiated a deal, and got that passed. Donald Trump has faked an emergency, essentially, using emergency power and done it unilaterally. Didn't go through Congress. And then he raised them and then he lowered them. And he raised them and he's lowered them again. He's changed the
And
deadline.
he will
If you
continue to do that. He will
and if
continue
you're
monkeying with them, right?
and if you right, do you but to me, if as a former business owner and you know this, if I've
Mhm.
had that much uncertainty, I have that much uncertainty, I'm not making long range decisions.
Mhm.
I don't think so. Here's what I'm going to predict. I will right out there. You're going to see inflation. You are definitely going to see inflation. You will not see a bunch of trade deals negotiated. Peter Navarro said 90 deals in 90 days. Jubal, from your estimation, how many trade deals have been negotiated as of May 23rd?
I don't think any.
I don't think any have either. There's been a framework of a deal
Mhm.
with China. We did come up with some sort of deal. It still hasn't gone through Congress with the UK, but we had a surplus with the UK.
Mhm.
And today he increased. He said things are not going fast enough, and that's why he uh, threatened this 50% increase on June 2nd, and the market obviously took a dive as a result. It's like
Mhm.
having an 8-year-old set economic policy, throwing tantrums. I don't know what I don't know what about this is either conservative, thoughtful, and it's done through in a manner that I find problematic. Like the use of executive power and the use of emergency power to set national policy on a whim, see, it is the most anti-business approach that I can think of. So I mean, I just looked at the policy that's an
Let's
epic failure thus far. Will it try to turn around?
sure.
Perhaps it could.
So
But
I think it's a little soon to to make the determination whether or not this, again, it's been 100 days, right? Or 120 days.
right. No,
Right?
no, no. I mean, I
So
just said that I thought the impact of the CHIPS Act is going to take time
here's the
to
thing. The
show up.
CHIPS Act, the problem that I had with the CHIPS Act is of all the industries out there, like microprocessors are probably the one industry that didn't need any government assistance. And of course, that's what the CHIPS Act is all about. It the difference between
Well, I think there was concern
the
about the supply line and the microprocessors as a result
there
of what
are
happened
the I
during the
think that
pandemic.
I think the CHIPS Act though is a very good juxtaposition here, because what you have is the CHIPS Act is the Joe Biden approach to bringing business to the United States. What do? Give them taxpayer money and try to encourage them to bring their operations here by basically gifting them with taxpayer money.
Well, wait,
What is the
gifting them. Wait,
what is the Trump approach?
giving them taxpayer money.
How much did the CHIPS Act cost?
Are you talking about tax breaks? Tax breaks are wait. I just want to be clear. Tax breaks now are giving them
No, no,
taxpayers
Phil.
money.
No, Phil. How much was the bill? How much did the bill cost us?
Again, I don't have that at my disposal
Okay.
right now.
It's out there. You can check for yourself. You can see how much the
Okay,
bill cost, right? Check it out.
absolutely. Go ahead.
So,
Notice that it went through Congress. Notice that it was negotiated in Congress, and notice that it had bipartisan support.
sure.
This is the way our government is supposed to run.
Right.
It's not supposed to
Anytime,
be by imperial decree.
look, I I I get it, right? And I
I
would
just think
say
that if a Democrat was doing this, you'd be freaking out. You'd be freaking out
if a Democrat was trying to get manufacturing to come back to the United States,
by 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 using executive power and pretending that we are in an emergency that requires unilateral executive action, not going to Congress, not
right?
negotiating this, making promises they can't be made. So again, let me just go back to my predictions. By the 90 day, the Peter Navarro's promise of 90 deals in 90 days, at the end of 90 days, there won't be any deals with our biggest trading partners. None. We may have some deals, but they will with countries that we have a surplus with already. Second thing, you will start to see an increase in prices. It will be dramatic, and it's going to happen within a month or so, unless Donald Trump completely backs off. Unless he completely backs off, and I don't know that he's dispositionally capable of doing that. So, assuming he doesn't just rescind them, which is what he should do, and go back to ground zero, and instead, if he wants to negotiate with other countries, do it like a grown up, do it like a competent person, do it in conjunction with Congress. That's how it should be done. That's how you govern instead of trying to generate headlines. That's what needs to happen. I'm hoping that that's what he's going to do. I'm hoping that some people on the inside are saying, sir, we need to back off on this. If it doesn't, what you're going to see is the Democrats are going to come in 2026 and they're going to control the House. And that's
So
going to
your so your predictions are that prices are going to go up,
correct.
no deals, no
No
trade.
deal. Well, no. There may no significant deals. There won't be significant deals. Any deals that happen will be with people with whom we have a trade surplus.
By when? What's the date we're putting on this?
Well, he said 90 deals in 90 days. Let's see where we are after 90 days.
When when is
That
that?
was his thing. I think, well, April 2nd is when they went in. So April, May, June, July
So
2nd,
we're talking July
By July
2nd.
2nd.
July 2nd, prices are up, no deals in place. And
Prices should go up before that.
okay, well, okay. All
Yeah.
right. So
I mean,
prices are
Walmart recently came out and said they were going to need to raise prices.
sure, sure.
And what was Trump's response?
Eat it.
Eat it. When he said eat the tariffs, what did he mean by eat the tariffs from your
Absorb the
understanding?
cost.
Absorb the cost.
Right.
That Walmart should absorb the cost.
Right.
But on the campaign trail, he said that the country that's importing the goods from which is being imported, they were going to pay the cost. He said
Hmm.
China would pay the cost. If China's paying the cost of the tariff, why would Walmart have to eat the cost?
Hmm.
Why would they have to pay? If China's really paying the tariff, why is Walmart being told to eat the cost?
I don't recall him saying that other nations would pay their tariffs.
Oh yeah, he did.
And again, I'm
We'll
gonna I'm
save
gonna
that for the
say
next.
I'm gonna
Jubal,
say
I'm going to find 500
I
quotes
hope
for
I
you.
hope you
And
can.
on the net, you guys, on the next episode, I'm just going to have a reel of Donald Trump saying over and over again until Jubal relents on this and says,
I
okay,
don't,
Phil, he
but
said it.
that's not how tariffs work. So he what
I
they
agree with you. No, no, no.
what
We
they did
found an area
say
of agreement.
what they did say was that things were going to be tough for the
What
first
he said
six
was that the
months.
other, I will find the quotes.
Okay.
Anyone listening knows this already, but I'm
I
going to
think what
do the
he I think
research.
you're conflating things. I think you're
No, I'm
conflating.
not. But let's not debate this. When we come back on our next set of current events, we'll
Okay.
continue with the tariffs and we'll begin with, did Donald Trump say foreign countries will pay the tariffs?
Okay.
Okay?
Apparently I'm in for it. So tariffs part 2 coming at you next week. Thanks for joining us everybody. See you soon.
Take care, everyone.